Afternoon.
Hello.
Thank you. I'll grab my water. I'll be right back.
Things are.
Yes.
You spell your last name.
Manalo.
Are you married, sir?
Swear from the testimony presented.
You're in the living room with your
Sir?
wife and
Yes.
your daughter putting
How long have
some,
you been married?
putting some furniture together when you hear some noises outside, correct?
Yes.
And your wife expressed sort of an interest in seeing what was going on, and you basically told her just mind your own business.
Yes.
And she said there's two guys out there fighting, or some guys fighting, correct?
Yes.
And you weren't unable to see anything.
No.
You never looked out. But you did hear the noise continue after that,
Yes.
and it moved from where you were at the corner of the complex, it moved from your right to left,
Yes.
as if from the area of the T on past your unit.
Yes.
And as you were hearing this, there was a point where you heard what you believed to be a shot.
Yes.
Did you hear the shot yourself, or did your wife say, I think I hear a shot?
We both heard the shot.
So in your mind, it was unmistakable that it was a shot.
Yes.
You made the decision then to go find out what that was about.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you went from the living room near the back of the residence the other direction, towards the garage.
Yes.
And in the garage, you grabbed a flashlight.
Yes.
Did you go out the garage door?
Yes.
And then basically on the front of your house, which is at Retreat View Circle.
Yes.
So you then would have had to turn back around and run the length of your house, your unit, that would basically bring you within view of where this event had occurred.
Yes, but I didn't run.
Walk briskly, just a sense of that is all.
I was carefully walking. I didn't just walk upon the scene, seeing what was going on.
Well, sure, you'd heard a gunshot, right?
Right.
You'd take some precautions, I would think.
Yes.
So you had a flashlight, and obviously you had your cell phone. And your best estimate is that it was somewhere between 10 and 20 seconds from when you heard the shot as to when you got to where you could actually see something.
Yes.
At first, you didn't see Trayvon Martin's body, correct?
Correct.
What you saw instead, or what caught your attention first, actually, what may have caught your attention first was the little flashlight that was on.
No.
What caught your attention first was George Zimmerman.
Yes.
And when you saw him there, he was breathing hard,
Yes.
he was staggering,
Yes.
and it looked to you like he'd just gotten his butt beat.
Yes.
And you approached him.
Yes.
You weren't fearful of him,
No.
didn't turn the other way to call the police.
I had asked him, do I need to call the police?
Well, I'm saying yourself. As you approached, you saw him, you knew there was a gunshot. You didn't turn to call the police yourself.
Right.
And when you got closer to Mr. Zimmerman, you asked him, in fact, do I need to call the police?
Yes.
And and he told you, no, I already called them, something to that effect.
Yes.
And you didn't know yourself at that moment whether he was talking about the call that he tried to be making or was on the phone, or whether he had called them himself 2, 3, 4 minutes before.
Not aware of that.
Right. Your assumption was that when you saw him on the phone at that point, with the phone up to his ear, that he had been talking to the police.
Yes.
But of course, all of that would have had to have taken place within the 10 to 20 seconds that it took you to get there before you saw him, after the shot.
Correct.
So he would have had to have placed a call to the police. He would have had to have called the police, waited for the call to connect, and then had the conversation with the police, have that over by the time you asked him, do you want me to call the police?
I'm not aware of that. I mean, he wasn't talking on the phone. It just, as I came around the corner, he had just had the phone to his ear.
Right. And you learned very soon thereafter that he wanted you to tell his wife about being involved in a shooting.
Yes.
He was trying to catch his breath, and he asked you, in fact, am I bleeding?
Yes.
And you noticed that indeed he was. He was bleeding from his face.
Yes.
It looked like his nose was dripping.
Yes.
And then he kind of stooped over like this, as if trying to collect himself.
No, he just squatted down. He didn't stoop down like that. He just
Like this?
Yeah.
As if trying to collect himself.
I want to say collect himself, but I guess so. I don't know. But he did squat down.
Well, did you say that in a prior statement, that you thought he kind of stooped down to try to collect himself?
I believe I said he squatted down.
I don't mean, I'm not squat versus stoop, but that he bent down in some way
Yes.
to try to collect himself. He was breathing hard. He looked like he'd just gotten his butt beat.
Yes.
Compound question.
Can answer if he understands.
He did.
Yeah.
Sure. So at that point, you could actually see that he was also bleeding from the back of his head.
Yes.
You hadn't noticed that before.
No.
And you had your flashlight and you had your cell phone with you,
Yes.
and you took that opportunity to take the picture of the back of his head. I'm sorry, it's this picture?
Yes.
So as Mr. Zimmerman kind of squatted down to collect himself, you took it upon yourself to take the picture.
Yes.
He didn't ask you to take the picture.
No.
Thankfully you did, but that was your decision.
Yes.
You also asked him what happened,
Yes.
and he said, this guy was beating me up and I shot him.
And I had to defend myself, and I shot him.
I'm sorry.
I was defending myself, and I shot him.
So this guy was beating me up, I was defending myself, and I shot him, is what he told you,
Yes.
without hesitation.
No.
And from what you could tell at the moment, it seemed completely true.
Yes.
It wasn't very long until the police arrived. You were standing there talking to Mr. Zimmerman as he tried to collect himself, and shortly thereafter, Officer Tim Smith of the Sanford Police Department got there, correct?
I didn't know his name.
Well,
Yep, right.
Right. A police within a very short time, the first police officer arrived,
Right.
and he had a flashlight.
I don't remember if he had a flashlight.
You don't remember the next person after you arriving with a flashlight?
I knew it was a police officer, but I don't remember the flashlight because I already had mine on.
Oh, right, you could see from your own flashlight,
Yes.
but it was really, really dark out there.
Yes.
So Officer Smith, will use that for our purposes, or the first officer arrived, and he said, who shot him?
Yes.
And George Zimmerman immediately said, I did.
Yes.
And Officer Smith said, do you have a gun, or something to that effect?
Yes.
And George Zimmerman immediately complied by raising his arms, or his right arm, and exposed the firearm that was in the holster on his right side.
Yes.
And then Officer Smith's response or reaction was, I'm going to handcuff you for officer safety.
Yes.
And that's in fact what happened.
Yes.
And George Zimmerman complied fully with that request.
Yes.
He basically made himself available to be cuffed behind the back.
Yes.
In the meantime, while George Zimmerman was in the process of being cuffed, he wanted you to call his wife.
Yes.
And in the process of him being cuffed and wanting you to call his wife, he put the phone on the ground.
Yes.
He couldn't very well do much since he was in the process of being cuffed other than that, correct?
Right.
So your purpose at that point was to let his wife know that her husband had been involved in a shooting.
Yes.
And indeed, That's what you did.
Yes.
You called and had a conversation with the person on the other end that you believed to be his wife.
Yes.
And your statement to her was, your husband's been involved in a shooting,
Yes.
and he's going to be taken in for questioning.
Yes.
And you were beginning to explain a little bit when Mr. Zimmerman, in the process of being handcuffed, said, just tell her I shot someone, correct?
Yes.
And that's to make it absolutely clear that he wasn't the one who had been shot, and that he was...
What Mr. Zimmerman was thinking?
Sustained.
You suggested a moment in your direct that he may have been abrupt, and abrupt by saying, basically, just get to the point.
Yes.
The point being that he wasn't shot, someone else had been shot.
Yes.
You thought that the way that Mr. Zimmerman said that wasn't animated enough. He wasn't hyper enough. He wasn't agitated enough for you to think that he was in shock.
I don't understand.
When you were asked, do you think he was in shock, in your mind, being in shock means somebody that's hyper, somebody that's agitated.
Or just complete unresponsive.
One extreme or the other.
Right.
So either someone's going to be basically bouncing off the walls or numb.
Right.
And Mr. Zimmerman wasn't either of those.
Right.
He was pointed, correct, in his response, just tell her I shot someone.
Yes.
He was also compliant with the police officer so that he did understand what was being said.
Yes.
And what struck you was that he was not, rather than not being animated, he was kind of flat. That's what you mean, didn't appear to be in shock, he was just kind of flat.
Yes.
So that's what you took to mean that he wasn't in shock.
Right.
Not that you have any particular training or experience in identifying when people are in shock.
Right.
I take it this isn't something that you've been involved in very many times in your life, if ever before.
Right.
While you were just something that reminded me here, you don't attend any of the HOA meetings yourself?
No.
You don't involve yourself in the community itself?
No.
With your work and family and all the stuff you've got going on, you don't attend meetings or participate in programs like Neighborhood Watch?
No.
Your view, at least at that point in your life in that community, was you just sort of mind your own business, go to work, and do what you need to do to support your family.
Right, and if there was ever a problem, because there's a sign up there that says Neighborhood Watch, if there was ever a problem, just call 911.
Mm-hmm. So when you come into the community, then there's a sign that says Neighborhood Watch, correct?
Yes.
And I suppose that means that somebody coming into the community to steal stuff or to hurt people would see that, presumably, and think that there's somebody there that may be watching them.
I wouldn't think that's what it meant. I would think it would have meant that people in the neighborhood would work together if there was a problem and call 911 if there was a problem, but not necessarily for a warning for would-be criminals to come in there to...
You don't think that was kind of like having a security alarm company sign in the front yard, but not actually having a system?
Haven't really thought about that, no.
Your perspective was it just reminds people that if they see a problem, they should call 911.
Right.
You familiar that the Community Neighborhood Watch program involved more communication more contact among neighbors, guidance as to what they should do, not if it's just an emergency that would require a 911 call, but what to do in a suspicious circumstance by calling a non-emergency number.
I don't understand.
Just, you didn't know what was going on in the community specifically with Neighborhood Watch.
Right.
I know you said that it was dark, and I know that you had a flashlight, and I know that you took 2 pictures that show Trayvon Martin lying on the ground following the shot. Those are in evidence as 77 and 78. Could we, first of all, we're going to show those here in a second, but the exact position that's shown in the photograph is the exact position that you personally saw with your eyes Trayvon Martin's body.
Yes.
You saw his legs kind of spread like this, almost as if he were riding a bicycle.
I don't remember.
Let's take a look at 77. Would you pull that up, please?
I got this one and I got 78 too.
Well, that's 77, so that's, I'm sorry, that's,
You want 77 or 78?
I don't care. We'll start with this one. Mr. Manalo, you took this photo of Trayvon Martin, and you see the legs that I've described as sort of almost riding a bicycle type position with the right knee bent and the
Yes.
hip at an angle. Do you see that?
Yes.
That's exactly how you first observed Mr. Martin's body when you got there.
Yes.
And the illumination of Mr. Martin's body is from your flashlight, correct?
Yes.
It's not from the flash on the phone.
No.
So you shined the flashlight and then took the photo.
Yes.
Around that spot, where you see it's much darker, is that a good depiction of what the overall lighting conditions were that night?
Yes.
If I could then see 78. Okay. So this is the next picture that you took. I don't know which sequence, and that doesn't matter, but the other picture that you took states 78. And you can see, can you not, that Trayvon Martin's body is in the same position, although it's a lot harder to see, isn't it?
Yes.
And now you can see more clearly this flashlight.
Yes.
And the flashlight was not on at any point in time when you saw it.
No.
At that point, you had no idea whether it may even have been connected to the case, only that you saw it there and it caught your attention.
Yes.
So when you shifted your flashlight to point at the one in the picture, then as you can see here, Mr. Martin's body was, just like I said before, except for what you're showing with your flashlight, everything else was really quite dark.
Right.
Do you know where you were standing at that point?
I was standing on the sidewalk.
Where you had encountered Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Basically in the same spot, right?
Yes.
So from your vantage point where you had taken this picture generally, you sort of turned and took the pictures that we've shown here?
Yes.
You were up near the T intersection.
Yes.
Your best recollection is that you were at the T intersection when you took this picture?
I was a few feet away from the T, but I was in that area.
You were somewhere between the actual T intersection and far enough down the sidewalk where you could see Mr. Martin's body to have taken this picture?
Yes.
You recognize that the light on the sort of back patio area is from the light of the second unit in from the corner?
I couldn't remember that, whether that's the second or the third unit from the corner.
It was not, however, directly across from you.
Correct.
It was somewhat to the left of where your unit was.
Yes.
Sorry. Just for orientation in the photo and sort of where you were when it was taken, you see the porch light or the lit area in the back,
Yes.
and you believe that to be the back of someone's unit, either the second or possibly the third unit.
Yes.
And then in the lower left corner, there seems to be sort of a dark edge. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that the sidewalk?
Yes.
So what you're seeing here is the edge of the sidewalk on the left, the illuminated flashlight that's off, and then Mr. Martin's body.
Yes.
In between the sidewalk and the back patio area of that residence.
Yes.
When you say that you saw Mr. Martin's hands or arms tucked under him, do I understand correctly that you saw what's in the picture? Nothing
Yes.
different than that?
No.
So whatever is in the picture is what you saw?
Yes.
There was a woman that testified earlier this week, Jeannie Manalo. Is that your wife that
Yes.
you talked about? You have a minute? Yes, I'll clarify something. Sorry. When you took this picture, you were basically at the spot where you had encountered Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the question.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Yes, Mr. You mentioned that you felt,
Remove the image, please.
I'm sorry, what?
Remove the image, please, for Exhibit 78. I'm finished with it.
You are?
Yes.
Okay, I may need it.
Okay.
Okay, but. Mr. Manalo, you mentioned that when you came into contact with the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman, that he appeared calm to you, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's already been asked and answered by Mr. Delariande in direct.
Okay, well, this is redirect, and I think he's just trying to orientate the witness as to his next question, so overruled.
You recall when you first came into contact, he was calm, is that correct?
Yes.
And
I think that's a mischaracterization of this witness's testimony
Overruled.
as to whether he was calm.
Okay, the witness can clarify what his answer is.
Thank you, Judge.
how would you describe Mr. Zimmerman's demeanor, sir?
Coherent, compliant. He wasn't, he was calm. You know, he was just basically just walking towards me.
Okay. Did he have any trouble walking towards you, sir?
He was staggering a little bit.
Okay. And when you say staggering, elaborate on that, what you mean by that.
Basically getting up off the ground.
Was he walking like this?
No, I just like hunched up.
Leading, among other things.
Overruled.
Was he erect, sir?
At one point, he became erect, yes.
Did you have any trouble understanding him when he spoke, Mr. Zimmerman?
No.
In your conversations with Mr. Zimmerman, did you ask him what kind of caliber of gun he had?
Yes.
And did he respond to you?
Yes.
What did the defendant say, sir?
9mm.
You were asked by Mr. West about the statements the defendant made about shooting the individual, and he asked you whether you agreed that that was defending himself. Were you out there when this happened?
I came out after it happened.
Did you see actually what happened? What precipitated this? Or did you actually see the shooting where George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin in the chest? Did you see that?
No.
Do you have any inkling of how it happened, whether it's self-defense or not?
No.
Thank you. No further questions. I apologize. You want this still up? No. Okay. I'm at the show, but that's all right. What do I do?
May Mr. Manalo be excused? Thank you very much, sir. You are.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir. If you please tell the members of the jury your name.
Ricardo Ayala.
And where are you employed?
Ayala.
You're employed where?
Sanford Police Department.
And how long have you been with the Sanford Police Department?
It'll be 11 years next month.
All right. And what's your current position?
Police officer.
And how long have you been in the patrol unit right now?
Just over a year.
All right. And before that, what was your position?
Investigations.
All right. And how long were you in investigations?
6 years.
And your duties as an investigator with the Sanford Police Department?
General and major crimes.
All right. Do you have any prior law enforcement experience before coming to the Sanford Police Department?
Yes, corrections.
And how long and where?
Total of 6 years, 5 of them in Seminole County, 1 in Lake County.
Let me turn your attention then to the evening of Sunday, February 26, 2012. Were you working at that time?
Yes, sir.
And on that evening, did you respond to the scene of a shooting at the retreat at Twin Lakes?
Yes, sir.
Were you dispatched to that scene?
Yes, sir.
What was the nature of the dispatch at first?
Suspicious person in the area.
Do you recall the time of the dispatch?
Just after 7 p.m.
Approximately 7:15, 7...
Correct.
Okay. What area of town were you in when you received the dispatch?
North end of the city.
And approximately how long did it take you to get from where you were to the retreat at Twin Lakes Community?
Less than 5 minutes.
Did you receive any updates to the first dispatch as you were en route?
Yes.
And
They
what was the nature of the dispatch?
stated that shots were fired.
Were you the first officer on the scene?
No, sir.
Who was the first officer?
Officer Tim Smith.
If you would dim the lights, please. Officer Ayala, let me show you State's Exhibit 1. Do you recognize that as being a aerial photograph of the retreat at Twin Lakes?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Yes, sir. Give you a laser pointer, just to press that. Give you the green light. Can you show the members of the jury where the main entrance is? With your laser pointer?
Right there.
All right. And that would be off of Oregon Avenue?
Correct.
All right. Can you show the members of the jury then where you went when you got in the neighborhood and where you parked?
Came this way, came into the entrance, went around the ways. I believe, if I'm mistaken, went around as such and parked right in this area right here.
All right. And for the record, you parked on the upper right-hand corner of the photograph?
Yes, sir.
All right. So you actually took the long way around. when
Yes,
you
I
got
wasn't
in.
familiar with the area.
Very good. Did you see Officer Smith after you got out of your patrol car?
Yes, I did.
And where did you see him, if you could just indicate approximately the area that you saw Officer Smith?
That general area right there.
All right. And for the record, that's in the approximate area of the T. What was the lighting like back there?
Very dim, very almost dark.
Were you using a flashlight to find your way between the townhomes?
Yes, sir.
What were the weather conditions like when you arrived?
Misty has been raining on and off.
And what was Officer Smith doing when you first arrived?
He had a white male at gunpoint.
Did you later learn the white male's name to be George Zimmerman?
That's correct.
And you see that person in court this afternoon?
Yes, sir.
And Judge, if you can raise the lights if you would. Is George Zimmerman the gentleman to my left who just stood up?
Yes, sir.
All right. Your Honor, the record should reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant.
The record will so reflect.
Did you have any interaction with the defendant at that point?
No, sir.
Why not?
I was focused on the male that was on the ground.
In the male that was on the ground, did you later learn that person's name to be Trayvon Martin?
That's correct.
And did you go over to Trayvon Martin's location?
I walked towards, yes.
And how was Trayvon Martin's body positioned when you arrived?
Face down, his hands were underneath the body.
And to your knowledge, were you the first officer to approach Trayvon Martin?
Yes.
All right. Did you know whether or not he was dead or alive at that point?
I did not.
Did you know what his involvement was at that point?
I did not.
Did you give him any commands, Trayvon Martin?
Yes, I did.
What commands did you give him?
I asked to see his hands
And where were his hands when you asked to see him?
underneath him.
He was lying on his stomach?
Correct.
Did Trayvon Martin respond physically in any way to your commands?
No, he did not.
Did Trayvon Martin respond verbally in any way to your commands?
No, he did not.
Did you see any movement from Trayvon Martin's body?
I did not.
Did you hear any sounds from Trayvon Martin's body?
I did not.
Did other Sanford Police Department officers approach you and Trayvon Martin while you were giving him those commands or shortly thereafter?
Sergeant Ramondo.
And did either you or Sergeant Ramondo attempt to get a pulse from Trayvon Martin?
Sergeant Ramondo did.
Was Sergeant Ramondo able to get a pulse?
No, sir.
Did you and or Sergeant Raimondo move Trayvon Martin's body after he failed to get a pulse?
Yes, I believe it was a joint.
I'm sorry?
I believe we moved him, yes.
Okay, how did you move him?
We turned him upside up, right side up.
All right, so you moved him from his stomach to his back?
Correct.
To your knowledge, did you move or disturb any evidence that was around his body or on his body when you rolled him over?
No, sir.
Did Trayvon Martin respond in any way, either physically or verbally, when you rolled his body over?
No, sir.
After rolling his body over, did you see anything that appeared to be a gunshot wound?
After moving it, at a later, yes.
After
He's moved over around, yes.
Yes, sir. And where was that?
It was underneath. He had a pin or a button, so it was underneath the button.
All right, he had are you indicating a button on his shirt or
Correct.
sweatshirt?
Yes,
All right. And the gunshot wound was near that area?
it was right underneath the button itself.
All right. How did you find the gunshot wound?
How did we find? We lifted. Well, when we moved the sweater, the button kind of lifted up, so you could see it went through the sweater. So at that time, we lifted up his sweater and shirt.
All right, actually exposing his bare chest?
Correct.
And you could see a gunshot wound or something that appeared to be a gunshot wound at that point?
Yes, sir.
Did you and Sergeant Raimondo perform CPR on Trayvon Martin?
Yes, sir.
And do you have CPR training?
Yes, sir.
And did either you or Sergeant Raimondo ask anybody for anything while you were performing or attempting to perform CPR?
Sergeant Raimondo was asking for a plastic bag, of some sort.
And did anyone provide anything to Sergeant Raimondo or yourself?
Someone provided a bag to him. Yes.
Can you describe the bag? Was it like a plastic type grocery bag?
Correct.
Do you recall the color of the bag?
I do not.
And do you recall who provided it?
I do not.
After receiving the bag, did you and Sergeant Raimondo continue to perform CPR?
Correct. We did.
At any time, did you see any signs of life from Trayvon Martin's body?
No, sir.
What was your role specifically in the administration of CPR?
I was doing chest compressions.
And what was Sergeant Raimondo's role?
He was doing mouth to mouth.
Did rescue eventually respond to the scene?
Yes.
And did the rescue personnel take over the treatment or assessment of Trayvon Martin after they arrived?
Yes.
Was Trayvon Martin pronounced dead at the scene?
Yes, he was.
Did you have any further contact or involvement with this defendant after you performed CPR on Trayvon Martin?
No, sir.
And did investigators and crime scene technicians respond to that scene while you were still present?
Yes, sir.
And did those officers and technicians take over the scene after they arrived?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any further involvement with the case?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. Judge, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr.
Just a couple of questions. When you had heard, as you were on your way, that Officer Smith had just arrived on the scene, correct? As you were coming,
As I was getting there,
right?
yeah, he was just arriving on scene.
Because you guys are in radio contact, weren't you, all the responding officers?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you knew that you were right behind Officer Tim Smith to get there?
Yes.
Could you even guesstimate from the radio transmissions how fast or quickly after him you got there?
If I would guesstimate, less than 2 minutes.
Okay. Matter of fact, it was so quick that the officer still had Mr. Zimmerman at gunpoint, right?
That's correct.
In a shots fired situation, when you come into a dark area like that, it's protocol to take out your weapon and control the situation, right?
Correct.
That's not to suggest any particular danger coming from Mr. Zimmerman. That's just what you do in a situation where you have shots fired.
That's correct.
And that's appropriately for Officer Smith to have done that here, correct?
Correct.
Now, if you were to come up to me, how would you tell me, or what would you tell me to do in a situation like that, where you pull your weapon and are trying to control a situation that you're just coming upon?
I want to see your hands.
Right. And you say that, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If I had a cell phone, you think it would be appropriate? If I had a cell phone, you say, see my hands, to maybe go like this?
No, it would not.
Or even like this?
No, it would not.
What would you want me to do with that cell phone?
Drop it where it's at.
Why?
That way we make sure we have no weapons and nothing in your hands.
Okay. When you came on with Smith, did you take out, right behind Smith, did you take out your weapon as well?
Yes, sir.
Same reason?
Yes, sir.
You don't know what's going on, do you?
No, we do not.
Can't see very much, can you?
No, sir.
Flashlight in one hand, your gun in the other?
No, the gun actually has a flashlight on
Oh,
it.
so both, gun with flashlight,
Yes.
watching and seeing what's going on.
Yes, sir.
You actually said in your report that you were protecting Officer Smith, right? Is that a
Correct.
focus, at least initially?
Correct.
Because he's at least a fellow officer potentially in a dangerous situation.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Once you realized, or did you come to realize that Officer Smith had that part of the situation, including Mr. Zimmerman, under control? Did that happen?
Well, I had my weapon out until, well, I was having my eyes on Mr. Zimmerman and Trayvon at the same time. We didn't know what was going on.
Right.
As soon as he secured Zimmerman, I went ahead and focused on Trayvon, make sure it was where the threat was coming from.
Was there another person there?
When we got there,
Yes.
or when I got there,
Yes.
there probably was. I was mostly
Okay.
focused on security for the other officer.
Just curious, we had some testimony that a neighbor had come out with a flashlight. It may not have caught your memory.
It doesn't, no.
Okay, because you're mainly focused on your fellow officers
Mhm.
and the interested parties, in that case, Mrs. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin.
Yes, sir.
Okay. From your awareness of it, did Officer Smith have any concerns with securing Mr. Zimmerman? Was he
No,
com-
after he got him secured
Okay.
and took him to his vehicle and secured him in a vehicle. He was gone. He was good.
Was Mrs. Zimmerman compliant as far as you were aware?
Yes.
Did he do everything that Officer Smith asked him to do?
Yes, he did.
Did he disobey in any form that you're aware of?
No, he did not.
Did you get a look at his face?
No. I looked at it. Yes, I'm sorry. His face. Yeah, I didn't focus
Right.
at.
Sort of a quick glance?
Yes.
Did you notice the blood on his nose?
I can't tell you I did. No.
Okay. Again, not a focus of yours once he was secured?
Exactly.
At that point, I think you said a moment ago, you shifted over to Trayvon Martin, who was off at that point sort of to the left?
Yes.
Okay. And it was quite dark, right?
Yes, sir.
You would not have been able to see Trayvon Martin's body but for your flashlight. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
And I think that you testified you attempted to do what you could as a first responder to deal with Trayvon Martin.
Correct.
And you did not see, did you see George Zimmerman again when he was in the back of Tim Smith's patrol car?
No.
Never even went over there?
I didn't make contact with him after he was secured.
Okay. Just a moment, Your Honor. Thanks, sir. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just briefly, Officer Ayala, when the defendant was complying with Officer Smith's commands, was Officer Smith holding him at gunpoint?
When I arrived there, yes.
Thank you. Judge, that's all I have.
Thank you. May Officer
Ayala.
Ayala be excused?
You may.
Thank you very much. You may.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am. If you'd please tell the members of the jury your name.
Stacy Livingston.
Let me ask you to just scoot up just a little bit closer to that microphone, just to make sure we can hear you. Where are you employed?
Sanford Fire Department.
And how long with the Sanford Fire Department?
A little over 25 years.
Your current position there is what?
Firefighter EMT.
And what does EMT stand for?
Emergency medical technician.
Are you certified in the state of Florida as both a firefighter and an EMT?
Yes.
And what are your duties as a firefighter EMT with the Sanford Fire Department?
Anything from fire calls to medical calls, or anything that the citizens call for.
All right. Can you give the jury a brief description of your training and education that has prepared you for your duties as a firefighter and EMT?
I went through the certification of Florida to become a firefighter, also state of Florida for EMT, and we have continuing education at work.
All right. Let me turn your attention then to the evening of Sunday, February 26, 2012, where you work in that evening.
Yes,
And on that evening, were you dispatched to the scene of a person shot at the retreated Twin Lakes complex here in Sanford, Seminole County, Florida?
yes.
Where were you when you were dispatched to the call?
At Fire Station 38.
And were you dispatched along with other firefighters and EMTs?
Yes,
Do you recall the time of the dispatch?
I do not.
Was it approximately 7:20 in the evening?
Yes.
All right. And can you give the jury an idea of about how long it took you to arrive?
It would be a guess.
You are man approach the witness? Let me just ask you to look at this document. It's just to refresh your recollection, Your Honor. And ask you, was that an incident report created from this event?
Yes,
All right. Is, on that report, is there a time of dispatch, either on the first page or the second page?
yes.
And what time was your unit dispatched?
1921.
That's 7:21 p.m.?
Yes.
And what time, is there an arrival time?
1927.
7:27 p.m.
Correct.
All right, about 6 minutes later?
Yes.
All right. Was the Sanford Police Department and officers already on the scene when you arrived?
Yes.
And were you directed to the location of the shooting victim when you arrived?
Yes.
Did you later learn that person's name to be Trayvon Martin?
Yes.
And were Sanford police officers present with Trayvon Martin's body when you arrived?
Yes.
And what were those officers doing?
CPR.
How was Trayvon Martin's body positioned when you got there?
On his back.
And did you and other Sanford Fire Rescue personnel take over the CPR when you arrived?
We didn't take over CPR, but we took over assessing him.
Okay. Did you check Trayvon Martin for a pulse?
Yes.
How did you do that?
On his carotid, on his neck.
On his neck?
Yes.
And what did you find?
No pulse.
While you were treating or evaluating Trayvon Martin, did you move his clothing in any way?
Yes.
And what did you move specifically?
I lifted his shirt.
Did you notice anything in Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt when you moved it?
Yes.
And what was that, as best you can recall?
I wasn't sure what it was at the time. I know what it is now.
Okay. Well, first of all, where was it?
In the front of his sweatshirt.
All right. What was it?
It felt like a can.
All right. What did you do with it, if anything?
I took it out and just moved it to my right side behind me.
Did you take time to examine the can for any reason?
No,
Why not?
it wasn't my concern. I was just trying to get to the patient.
All right. Did you detect or feel anything else in Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt when you moved it?
Yes.
And what was that?
It just felt like maybe a small bag. When I moved the shirt, it made like a kind of like a crinkling noise.
All right. Did you do anything with that small bag?
I did not.
And was that item also in Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt?
I wasn't exactly where it was, but when I moved the shirt up, I felt it, but it wasn't large enough to be in my way.
All right. When you pulled up Trayvon Martin's sweatshirt, did you see any injuries?
Yes.
And specifically, did you see what appeared to be a gunshot wound?
Yes,
And where was that?
in his chest.
And what steps did you and the other personnel take to assess Trayvon Martin?
We put on a cardiac monitor
And what's the purpose of that?
to assess the heart rhythm.
And what was determined from the cardiac monitor?
It was determined by the lead paramedic on the scene that the rhythm was incompatible to life.
And was Trayvon Martin then pronounced dead at the scene?
Yes,
Does your does the report from the incident indicate the time that Trayvon Martin was pronounced dead?
on the report that I
Yes-
have here.
Yes, ma'am.
$1930.
7:30?
Yes,
All right, and that was just a few minutes after you arrived, about 3 minutes after you arrived?
yes,
Okay. At any point, did you hear Trayvon Martin make any sounds?
no,
Did you or anyone from your agency transport Trayvon Martin's body from the scene?
no.
And why not?
That wouldn't be part of our job.
Is that something, when a person's deceased, that's left for the medical examiner's office?
Yes,
Other than taking the can out of Trayvon Martin's shirt pocket, did you move or collect any other items on or around him?
no.
All right, let me ask you to look at your screen. Your Honor, would you dim the lights? Thank you. State's Exhibit 20, do you recognize that?
Yes,
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the way Trayvon Martin appeared after he was pronounced?
well, we had his shirt up, but yes,
Okay. And State's 25 from the other side, is that also an accurate depiction of the way he appeared?
yes,
And State's 80
yes.
and State's 28, what's depicted in that photograph?
The gunshot wound.
And that obviously would be when his sweatshirts were pulled up.
Yes,
Your Honor, that's all I have for the lights. All right. After Trayvon Martin was pronounced dead, did you treat a man later identified to you as George Zimmerman at that same scene?
yes.
Do you see that individual in court this afternoon?
I don't know. Yes,
Is he the gentleman standing to my left?
yes.
All right. Your Honor, I ask that the record reflect the witnesses identify the defendant.
Record is so before.
Where was the defendant when you made contact with him?
Sitting in a police car.
And when you met with the defendant, did you talk to him?
Yes,
Did the defendant appear to have any difficulty understanding what you were saying?
no,
Did you have any difficulty understanding the defendant when he responded to you?
no,
Did the defendant appear to have any memory problems?
no.
You object to that, Your Honor, that would be speculation.
Sustained.
And since it got out before the objection, I would need to move to strike the answer.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're to disregard the question and the answer.
What is a Glasgow coma score?
It's a scoring system that we use to determine the level of responsiveness of a patient.
And what are the components of it? What makes it up?
It has 3 sections for verbal and motor response. And they each have a series of numbers, like a score. For example, for I, it's 4, 3, 2, 1. It would be spontaneous, to command, to pain, and none. And each section has a different amount of numbers for a score.
All right. And what's the highest score someone can get? That is the most alert someone can be.
A 15,
And what was the defendant's Glasgow coma score that evening?
15.
And what does that highest score indicate to you?
It would indicate that for I response, it was spontaneous. For verbal response, he was oriented. And for motor response, he obeyed commands.
Did you observe any injuries to the defendant?
Yes.
And what injuries did you observe?
He had a very swollen, bleeding nose. He had lacerations to the back of his head.
Was the defendant's nose actively bleeding when you arrived?
I don't believe it was actively bleeding.
All right. And
It
what
was
did
still
you-
moist.
Okay. What did you do to treat his nose?
We just tried to clean up his injuries so we could see them better to determine.
And describe the lacerations that you saw on the back of the defendant's head.
I recall 2 lacerations, approximately an inch long,
All right. Were either of those lacerations bleeding?
not actively bleeding, but they had been.
And how did you treat the lacerations to the defendant's head?
The same, we just tried to clean up a little so we could view better what the injury was.
At any point while you were treating the defendant, did he stand up?
Yes,
Did the defendant have any trouble with his balance when he stood up?
I don't believe so.
And about how long were you treating the defendant?
Maybe 5 minutes.
Did you transport the defendant from the scene?
No.
And why not?
It was determined that if he needed further medical treatment, that the Sanford police would take him.
And after you completed your examination of the defendant, did you leave the defendant in the custody of the Sanford Police Department?
Yes.
All right. Did you have any further involvement with the defendant after you left him with the police officers?
No.
All right. Let me ask you to look at the screen again, Your Honor. Thank you. State's Exhibit 79. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the defendant as he appeared in the back of the officer's patrol car?
Yes.
And State 76, is that a fair and accurate depiction of the back of his head when you came upon him?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Good.
Speaking about when you came in contact with my client, George Zimmerman, he was in the back of the patrol car, correct?
Yes.
And we just saw a couple pictures of him, and in the front picture I want to talk about first. You didn't actually do the evaluation, did you, on him, the sort of workup? Wasn't that 2 other paramedics that were out there as well, correct?
What do you mean evaluation?
Well, I'm sort of who did sort of the workup on Mrs. Zimmerman to identify injuries and whatnot. Wasn't Mike Brandy in charge of sort of lead in that?
I believe it was myself and firefighter Kevin O'Rourke who treated Mr. Zimmerman.
Okay, wasn't Mike Brandy there as well?
He was on the scene.
Okay. And when you did the evaluation, you noticed that the nose was swollen. I think you said very swollen, correct?
Yes, it was very swollen.
Okay. Explain, we saw the picture. Let's take a moment to look at that. I'm going to look for a little bit of help. I think I can get there. Thank you, Your Honor. Let's go down. No, I can just do it. In here? Let's put down to Great, thank you.
Which one?
The one right there, thanks. So looking at this one, first of all, this does fairly and accurately depict his nose and his face, correct, as you saw it?
Yes, I believe we may have even, because we wiped it a bit.
So even well, was that before this picture, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. So tell me what you see there as far as his injuries, if you can be a bit more descriptive.
The bridge of his nose is very swollen.
And that's off to the right of the nose, that swelling area there, is that what you're speaking of?
I recall both sides being swollen.
Okay, so the nose itself may be more on the right, but I was going to ask, the left side is swollen as well, isn't it?
The entire area was quite
Okay.
swollen.
And what is that just on the bridge of the nose, sort of going towards his right eye? that little red spot?
Appears to be a laceration, a small laceration.
Did you note that as well, that he had a laceration on the nose?
I did not.
Okay. How does a person get a laceration like that?
I don't know.
Okay. In your experience, is that consistent with getting struck in the nose by a fist?
It could.
Okay. Similar to the injuries to the nose itself and the swelling, are they also consistent with a fist strike to the nose?
Very possibly.
Okay. And do you see the injuries to what would be closest to you, his left forehead? Do you see those markings up there?
Yes.
What is that?
Looks like an abrasion.
Okay. Can you tell how that may have been, how he was injured with that?
I cannot.
Okay. Would you agree that that would be a separate injury from the injury to his nose?
Yes.
Now let's talk about what seems to be on the tip of his nose. What is that?
Blood.
And is that what you talked about earlier, that it was still moist in the process of drying?
Yes.
Where was that coming from?
His nose.
Inside?
Yes.
What does that indicate to you?
An injury to the nose.
Of what sort? What happens when the nose bleeds? How does it start bleeding?
Specifically?
Well, as best you can, if you can, describe how a shot to the nose would cause bleeding like that. What has to happen to it?
I mean, blood vessels would initiate bleeding.
Okay, and those blood vessels that exist up in the nose, correct?
Yes.
Any idea what happens to the blood that breaks or that escapes from blood vessels when you're laying on your back? What if you had that injury and you were laying on your back? Where would the blood go?
You would probably swallow it.
You go back up into your sinuses
Correct.
and then back down the back of your throat?
Correct.
And then, if you could, you'd be swallowing your own blood, right?
Right.
You can put the lights up if you would. Thank you very much. The injuries that we talked about on the back of the head, similar. You saw them that night the same way, correct?
Yes,
And then you cleaned them off,
I did.
and you could see lacerations that you identified as being about 1 inch long each, correct?
Approximately.
All right. Not actively bleeding when you saw them?
No.
Do you have a concern with head injuries? When you see a head injury, similar to this, what concerns come to you?
Concerns meaning,
Well, what medical issues are you down to? If you were to see, as you did, those 2 1-inch lacerations on the back of his head, did you have any concerns for any medical condition that may be happening to Mrs. Zimmerman because of those injuries?
yeah, we had, in questioning him, we asked, had he lost consciousness? I think he's the one that said he had felt dizzy.
Mm-hmm.
We just continued to question him about that.
You would be concerned as a first responder to possible concussive injuries from an injury like that?
Correct?
Where you can get a concussion when your head is hit that way?
Correct.
And even brain injury, is that a possibility from an injury like that?
Possibly.
And something that you need to be aware of?
Yes.
And you were only aware of that and concerned about it as you were treating him, correct?
Yes.
Reasonable, in your opinion, for somebody who's incurred those type of injuries to be concerned about their own continued safety?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Do you think a person who sustained those type of injuries in the back of the head should be concerned about their medical safety?
Possibly.
And how about the nose? Would that cause you concern about a person's medical safety if that injury was caused to them?
Possibly.
Did, what is the normal procedure for head injuries and getting them x-rayed?
Well, they would have to be transported to a medical facility to receive an x-ray.
Sure, you can't get x-rays just in the back of your ambulance, right?
Right?
So you'd have to take them to the hospital?
If they choose to go.
And who helps make that decision?
If the patient is fully awake and alert, they can make the decision.
So is it, that final decision actually left up to the non-medical personnel?
It was discussed, and we explained that we would be happy to transport him, and I'm not exactly how the determination was made, but I knew that it was determined that if he was going to receive medical care, the police was going to take him.
So that sort of became the police responsibility at that point, correct?
Correct.
Had it not been for the police involvement, would you have suggested to the person who had that injury and the injuries in the back of his head to go get some x-rays?
We would have said the same thing, that we would be happy to transport him, but it would have been up to them.
Okay. If I might just have a moment, Your Honor. Just a minute or more and we'll be done. You said that he was able to get up, and did you say he stood up without trouble? Or I couldn't quite hear exactly what you said when you were asked about was he able to stand?
When we got to him, he was actually sitting sideways in the police car.
With
He
his sort of
wasn't-
feet out of the car and his...
Yes. The
Okay.
door was open and his feet were out.
All right.
And when, however, it came about that he had said he had been dizzy, we asked him to stand up to see if he still felt dizzy, and he was able to stand up.
With the assistance of Officer Smith and one of the paramedics, correct? Because he was handcuffed behind his back, wasn't he?
I don't recall if he was handcuffed behind his back.
Okay, you don't recall that?
I don't.
Do you recall Officer Tim Smith helping him out of the car when he was complaining about being dizzy?
I do not.
Okay, do you remember whether it was paramedic Mike Brandy who helped him out of the car as well when he complained about being dizzy?
I do not.
Okay, your focus is really on injuries, clear them up, identify them, and then evaluate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
Just briefly, Your Honor.
From your observations of the defendant, both his physical condition and his mental capabilities, did you have any concern that he had sustained a brain injury?
I wouldn't make that determination.
Did the defendant ever complain, other than of dizziness, did he ever complain of a headache or excruciating pain, anything like that?
Not to me.
Did he ever lose consciousness? While
No,
you were
not while
there?
we were with him.
Did someone ask him whether or not he had lost consciousness prior to your arrival?
I believe so.
What did he say?
I didn't. I'm not the one that asked, so I don't know.
Did you ever take the time to measure either of the lacerations on the back of his head?
No.
All right, so your testimony about them being approximately an inch, that would be a guess?
Approximately an inch, yes.
All right. Would you defer to someone who actually measured them?
I'm sorry?
Would you defer the length of each of the lacerations to someone who actually measured them?
To be exact, yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Judge, that's all I have.
Thank you. May Ms. Livingston be excused?
She may.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much.